I've been driving trucks for almost 20 years now. I've seen my fair share of strange things out on the road, but nothing ever comes close to the night I drove through Highway 84 in the middle of nowhere. I remember it clearly, too clearly actually. It's not a memory I can shake off easily, no matter how hard I try. It was late November, a time of year when the air feels heavy and the nights seem to stretch on forever. My latest job was a long haul, taking a load of building supplies to a small town across the state line. The load was heavy, but that's not unusual. What was unusual was the route. Highway 84 is notorious among truckers for being, well, off. People say things go wrong on that stretch of road. Trucks break down for no reason. Strange weather rolls in without warning, and drivers report seeing things in the dark that make them swear off trucking altogether. I didn't believe any of it. I figured it was just the usual road talk, stories that get bigger with each telling. I was wrong. The night started off like any other. I fueled up at a truck stop a few miles outside of town, grabbed some coffee, and settled in for the long drive ahead. The highway was mostly empty, save for a few cars here and there. The silence was comforting at first, but as the hours went on, the weight of it began to feel more oppressive. It was like the world had been swallowed up by the darkness, leaving nothing but me and the road. About 2 hours into the drive, I noticed the first sign of trouble. The CB radio, which had been crackling with the occasional chatter from other truckers, went dead. I fiddled with the knobs, but no matter what I did, I couldn't get a signal. Static. Pure static. I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just too far from the nearest town, and the signal was weak. I had my music to keep me company, so I turned up the volume and kept my eyes on the road. Another hour passed, and that's when I saw the fog. It came out of nowhere. 1 minute, the road ahead was clear, and the next, a thick rolling fog covered everything. It was the kind of fog that clung to the ground and swirled around the tires, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of me. I slowed down, my hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. Fog like that isn't uncommon during this time of year, but there was something different about this. It felt wrong, like it didn't belong there. I pushed forward, keeping my eyes on the white lines painted on the road. The fog seemed to get thicker the further I went. The headlights barely cut through it, casting eerie shadows that danced along the side of the road. I thought about pulling over and waiting for it to clear, but something in the back of my mind told me to keep going. I had a delivery to make after all. Then I saw the figure. At first I thought it was just another shadow, a trick of the fog. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't. There, standing in the middle of the road, was a man. He was tall, thin, and dressed in what looked like old-fashioned clothes, like something out of a different era. His head was down, and he didn't seem to notice my truck barreling toward him. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the truck came to a stop, just a few feet from where he stood. My heart was racing, and for a moment, I just sat there staring at him. He didn't move, didn't react at all, just stood there, as if he were waiting for something. I leaned out the window and called to him, asking if he needed help. No response, just silence. The fog seemed to press in around us, making the air feel thick and heavy. My gut told me something was very, very wrong. I hit the horn, hoping the sound would snap him out of whatever trance he was in. The noise echoed through the fog, but he still didn't move. That's when I noticed something else. There were no other sounds. No crickets, no wind, not even the hum of my truck's engine. It was like the world had gone completely still. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't sure what to do. Part of me wanted to get out and check on him, but the other part, the smarter part, told me to stay in the truck. Something about the way he just stood there, unmoving, didn't sit right with me. I'd seen people break down in the middle of nowhere before, but this was different. There was something unnatural about it. I backed the truck up a little, giving myself some space. Maybe he'd move once I gave him room. But no, He just stood there, his head still down, his face hidden by the shadows. After what felt like an eternity, I decided I couldn't sit there forever. I had a schedule to keep, and the longer I waited, the worse the fog seemed to get. I shifted into gear, swerved around him, and drove on. My eyes flicked to the mirrors, half expecting him to start walking toward me, but he didn't. He just faded into the fog, disappearing as quickly as he'd appeared. I kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me through the fog. Every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror, just a flicker, a shadow moving in the fog, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. The miles dragged on, and the fog never lifted. It seemed to swallow the road, making it feel like I was driving in circles, getting nowhere. The silence, too, was unbearable. Even the radio refused to come back to life, no matter how much I messed with it. Then I saw the lights. Up ahead, through the thick wall of fog, I spotted the faint glow of what looked like headlights. Relief washed over me. Another trucker, I thought. Maybe I wasn't alone out here after all. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't another truck. The lights were too low to the ground, too dim. They flickered like old lanterns, swaying in the fog. And then I saw the house. It was a small, run-down shack, sitting just off the side of the road. The lights came from inside, casting long shadows across the dirt. I slowed down, trying to get a better look. The place looked abandoned, old, with peeling paint and broken windows. But the lights were definitely on, flickering like candles in the wind. Something about the house drew me in. I wasn't sure if it was curiosity or something else, but before I knew it, I had pulled the truck to a stop just in front of it. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, the fog pressing in around me, almost like it wanted to keep me there. I sat there for a moment, debating whether I should get out or just drive on. But that same nagging feeling in the back of my mind told me to stay. I needed to know what was in that house. I grabbed a flashlight from the glove box and stepped out of the truck. The cold night air hit me like a wall, sending a shiver down my spine. The fog was so thick I could barely see a few feet in front of me. The only thing I could make out was the faint glow coming from the house. As I walked toward it, my boots crunched on the gravel beneath me, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. The house wasn't just abandoned, it was decayed, like it had been forgotten for decades. But the lights, they were real. I could see them flickering behind the broken windows. I reached the front door, which was hanging off its hinges. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Everything in me was screaming to turn back, to get in my truck and leave. But something pushed me forward. I had to know. I pushed the door open and it creaked loudly in the silence. The inside of the house was worse than the outside, dusty, with broken furniture scattered everywhere. The air was stale, thick with the smell of mildew and rot. And then I saw them. Sitting in the corner of the room, huddled together in the flickering candlelight, were people. At least they looked like people. But there was something wrong with them. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, and their eyes, God, their eyes were empty, hollow. They turned to look at me as I stepped inside, their movements slow, deliberate. None of them spoke. They just stared, unblinking, their mouths slightly open as if they were waiting for something. I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest, my instincts screaming at me to run. But I couldn't move. It was like the fog had seeped into my brain, clouding my thoughts, dulling my senses. One of them stood up. A woman, her long, stringy hair hanging in front of her face. She took a step toward me, her bare feet dragging across the floor. "Join us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of my own breathing. "Stay with us." I stumbled backward, my hand fumbling for the door. I didn't care what was going on in that house. I just needed to get out, get back to my truck, back to the road. As I turned to run, I heard the door slam shut behind me. I didn't stop. I sprinted back to my truck, the fog swirling around me, pressing in from all sides. I jumped into the cab, slammed the door shut, and hit the gas. The tires spun on the gravel for a moment before finally catching traction, and I sped down the road, not daring to look back. The fog stayed with me for miles, but eventually it began to lift. The air cleared, and the road stretched out before me once more. The silence was gone, replaced by the hum of the engine and the crackle of the CB radio finally coming back to life. I never did figure out what happened that night, and I don't plan on going back to find out. I finished the haul, but I avoided Highway 84 after that. There are some places you just don't go back to, and some things you never forget. Driving trucks was the only life I'd ever known. I had been doing it for more than 20 years, hauling goods across the country, mile after mile, state after state. You get used to the long, lonely nights on the road after a while. It becomes your normal, the hum of the engine, the passing lights of cars, and the quiet darkness surrounding you. It's peaceful, in a way, until it isn't. There are roads you hear about from other truckers, roads they say you shouldn't drive at night. Route 63 was one of those roads. It cuts through the middle of nowhere, through dense forests and past old abandoned towns. I'd heard stories from other drivers about strange sightings, breakdowns in the middle of the night, and things in the dark that couldn't be explained. But I was never one to believe in ghosts or hauntings. I figured they were just stories, told to pass the time and give the guys something to talk about at truck stops. That all changed one cold November night. I had a delivery to make in a small town in Wyoming, and Route 63 was the fastest way to get there. I didn't think much of it when I saw the road sign pointing me onto the highway. I'd driven it before, during the day, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But this time, it was different. It was late, around 11 p.m., and the sky was overcast. The moonlight struggled to shine through the thick clouds, casting long shadows across the road. As I turned onto Route 63, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Too quiet. There weren't any other cars on the road, not a single one. I thought that was strange, but not impossible. It was a lonely stretch of road after all. I turned on the radio, hoping for some music or chatter to fill the silence, but all I got was static. Every station, just static. I turned it off, not wanting to deal with the eerie hiss of the radio. I had my coffee and a few hours to go. I figured I'd make the delivery by morning and be back home by the next night. The first few miles were uneventful. The road stretched out in front of me, a long dark ribbon disappearing into the horizon. The trees on either side of the highway stood tall, their branches swaying slightly in the wind. There was something calming about it, almost peaceful, despite the emptiness. But that calm didn't last long. About 30 minutes into the drive, I noticed something strange. The fog. It came out of nowhere, thick and heavy, rolling across the road like smoke. One minute the sky was clear, and the next, I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. I slowed the truck down, squinting through the windshield as the fog swallowed everything around me. That's when I saw the first figure. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe a shadow from the trees or something in the fog. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person, a woman, standing on the side of the road, her back turned to me. She was wearing a long white dress that looked old, like something out of a different time. Her hair was long and tangled, hanging down her back in messy waves. I slowed the truck down even more, my heart beating a little faster. There was no reason for anyone to be out here, in the middle of the night, on this road. I thought about stopping, maybe seeing if she needed help, but something in my gut told me to keep going. As I passed her, I glanced in my rearview mirror to get another look, but she was gone. Yeah, just like that, she disappeared into the fog. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I pressed down on the gas, wanting to get as far away from that spot as possible. Maybe I was tired, I told myself. Maybe the fog was playing tricks on my eyes. But deep down, I knew what I saw. And I knew it wasn't normal. The fog only got thicker as I drove on, swirling around the truck in thick white waves. I kept my eyes on the road, barely able to make out the yellow lines that guided me forward. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something, movement in the trees or shadows darting across the road, but whenever I looked directly at it, there was nothing there. An hour passed, maybe 2. Time started to feel strange, like I'd been driving for longer than I should have. The road seemed to stretch on forever, with no end in sight. I hadn't seen any signs, no exits, no towns, just more of the same dark highway and endless fog. And then, out of the fog, I saw something up ahead. It was a gas station, or at least it looked like one. The lights were on, flickering faintly in the fog, and there was an old beat-up truck parked out front. The building itself looked run down, like it hadn't been used in years. But I was running low on fuel, and I figured I could at least stop to stretch my legs and fill up the tank. I pulled into the gas station, the gravel crunching under the tires as I parked the truck next to one of the pumps. I stepped out, the cold night air hitting me like a punch. The fog seemed to cling to the ground, swirling around my feet as I walked toward the entrance of the station. The place was even creepier up close. The windows were dirty, covered in grime and dust, and the door hung slightly off its hinges. I didn't see anyone inside, but the lights were on, so I figured someone had to be around. I pushed open the door, the bell above it jingling softly as I stepped inside. The air inside was stale, like it hadn't been aired out in years. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with old dusty cans and snacks that looked like they'd expired a long time ago. The place was empty, no cashier, no customers, just silence. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but my voice sounded small in the empty space. I waited a moment, listening for any sign of life, but there was nothing. Just the faint hum of the lights above me. Feeling uneasy, I decided to get back to the truck and keep moving. I didn't need fuel that badly, and the place gave me the creeps. As I turned to leave, though, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a figure standing at the far end of the aisle. It was the same woman I'd seen on the side of the road. She stood there, staring at me with wide, empty eyes, her white dress flowing around her as if moved by an invisible wind. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her lips were cracked and dry. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. She didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood there, watching me. I didn't know what to do. I was frozen in place, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run. But I couldn't move. Suddenly, the lights in the gas station flickered, and then everything went dark. For a few seconds I stood there in the pitch-black silence, my breath coming in shallow gasps. When the lights finally flickered back on, she was gone. I didn't waste any time. I bolted for the door, throwing it open and running back to the truck. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, my breath fogging up the windshield as I tried to start the engine. After what felt like an eternity, the engine roared to life, and I sped out of the gas station as fast as I could. The road seemed even darker now, the fog thicker, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of that woman, standing there in the gas station, watching me. I don't know how long I drove after that. Time felt strange again, like the road was playing tricks on me. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her standing in the middle of the road again, but there was nothing, just the endless fog. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw lights in the distance. Not the eerie flicker of gas station lights, but real, bright lights, street lights. I'd made it to a town. I pulled into a small truck stop on the edge of the town, my hands still shaking as I parked the truck. I got out, needing to stretch my legs and clear my head. The fog was finally starting to lift, and the night felt a little less heavy. I went inside the truck stop, hoping to grab a cup of coffee and maybe talk to someone, anyone, to shake off the weird feeling that had settled over me. The cashier behind the counter looked up as I walked in, giving me a tired nod. I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat down at one of the booths, staring out the window at the empty parking lot. The truck stop felt normal, like the world had righted itself again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. After a few minutes, the cashier came over to refill my coffee. I thanked her, making small talk about the weather and the long drive. I mentioned Route 63, and she frowned. "You came in from Route 63?" she asked, her voice low. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" She glanced around the truck stop before leaning in a little closer. "People around here don't drive that road at night." "Not anymore." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Why not?" She hesitated for a moment, then said, "There's something out there. People see things they can't explain. Most folks who take that road at night don't come back." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, finishing my coffee in silence. That was the last time I drove Route 63. Some roads are better left alone,